Hello and welcome to Roundtable. If the internet really is like the Wild West, how many weapons should the sheriff be allowed? The UK is planning new laws to police the World Wide Web. Are we heading for a shootout? Concerns are being voiced that the new powers could lead to censorship, that the government will be able to overrule the country's communications watchdog and give politicians too much control. Very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. It is a very complicated area, and so we have brought together industry experts who have their concerns, but who also recognize that if cowboy country is to be tamed, then it's time to get the ammunition ready. This year, the UK government published its online safety bill to combat what it calls harmful online content. The bill aims to make social networks, search engines and other online services with UK customers liable for what their users share online. But campaigners are worried that it could also make policing the internet a political exercise. The government minister will be able to change the rules on how internet companies protect users to make sure that those rules reflect government policy. The concern is that the UK's internet regulator will no longer be independent. The proposals include fines for non-compliance of up to $25 million or 10% of a provider's annual global revenue. For some civil liberties groups, the proposed law amounts to a government power grab with worrying implications for freedom of speech. The question is, who should decide what we get to see and share online? Well, fortuitously, via the power of the internet, we're able to welcome back to Roundtable Inma Martinez, an artificial intelligence pioneer and data scientist. She's in London, as is Antony Walker, Deputy Chief Exec of Tech UK. That's a trade association working with companies and organizations to realize what they call a positive outcome of digital technology. And Julia Hornle, Professor of Internet Law at Queen Mary University of London. This is a conversation. I just want to try and find things out. So I'm going to start with you, Inma. Isn't one of the biggest problems with this who decides what is harmful or not?
Indeed, indeed. Up until now, it has all been bestowed to the power of the tech companies that own social media platforms and search services. So indeed, it's out of the regulatory framework.
So it's out of their framework, it's given to somebody else, in this case, the government-appointed body, Ofcom, the Office for Communications. How does that organisation, or anybody else indeed, decide what is harmful or not?
It's basically based on the analog world, but there were grey areas such as, can someone be thrown out of Twitter? For example, what happened to Donald Trump? And although in the real world, he only expressed his ideas, according to the community guidelines of both Facebook and Twitter, he infringed them. And therefore, the decision was made by the owners of Facebook and Twitter, and not because it was illegal under the law to express your opinions.
So that was their view of what was right or wrong to do on their platform. Julia, let me come to you since you deal with the law. In the UK, this is now falling to the House of Commons, the House of Lords, to pass this into law. It then comes down to the authorities in this country to determine what is or isn't good for those people out there. Are the tech companies going to be worried about this?
I think there are two things here. The tech companies themselves will have to carry out risk assessments in order to assess what is harmful to children and what is harmful to adults. The risk assessment in relation to adults is only for one particular type of companies, the category 1 company, which we don't know yet who that will be. So there is a large amount of input from the industry itself. So at the moment, they are obviously determining what is harmful in a way through their terms and conditions and their community guidelines. And so this is taking one step further towards co-regulation, in that Ofcom now will have a say, but the codes of practice and the actual standards will be formulated in cooperation with the industry.
Well,
The only
help me here, would you? Because let's say, let's use Facebook as an example. It puts something out there that the British government deems to be harmful. And it's also broadcast in Australia, it's broadcast in Chile, it's broadcast in Iceland. Is it down to those individual jurisdictions also to say what is right and what is wrong?
That is one of the difficulties, I think, of this, because there's clearly a jurisdictional issue here. So indeed, there will be overlapping jurisdictional claims by other countries too, who will say, well, what about the Australian standards? What about German criminal law? What about, French criminal law? So all these standards will have to apply at the same time. And the link is basically where the users are. So the UK standards only apply if the social media company, for example, targets the UK or has a substantial number of users in the UK, or there is substantial harm in the UK.
Okay.
But that doesn't solve with the overlap, right?
Antony, let me ask you, you represent so many people who must be interested in this. This is the way I'm going to put it at the moment. Are companies worried about the scale of the fines, the different definitions there will be on harm or not harmful, worried or confused?
Well, first of all, when you say the companies that could be worried about this, according to the government's own analysis, there are 24,000 businesses in the UK that this legislation could apply to. So first of all, the sheer scope in terms of the number of companies that are going to have to start thinking about online harms in a different way. I think the second thing is this kind of subjective nature that you talked about is, in actual fact, most of the large tech companies don't want to be responsible for making these subjective discussions about what is and isn't harmful. And they do want help and guidance in terms of making some of those big decisions, which are big societal decisions.
But unless there was just one supreme being ruling the internet world, perhaps from on high, this is always going to be the case, isn't it? You can't leave it up to the poacher to police himself. You have to have some kind of laws, and it's always going to be confusing because there is no super being.
Well, I mean, in the UK, Ofcom is going to have that responsibility. The question is how is Ofcom going to do it? How is Ofcom going to make those decisions about kind of balancing between these different objectives about preventing harm, but also ensuring freedom of speech and so on? And the other thing is at the moment, it's very hard to determine exactly how this legislation is going to work because these harms that are called about being harmful but legal, still haven't actually been defined. We don't know what they're going to be yet because we're waiting for the secondary legislation. So as yet, we don't know how much of this is really going to work in practice.
Have a think, Antony, if you would, about whether you and your organisation believe something like this was necessary, if a little bit confusing. I'll come back to you on that, if I may, because I want to ask Inma a couple of questions. You seem to be sort of nodding in agreement that there is a very confusing situation out there, but something had to be done. Is this the least worst option?
Something had to be done, and indeed the UK is not just the only country that is preparing bills such as this one. France, Germany, Denmark, many other countries, Australia, New Zealand, which means that the internet for the last 20 years has been the Wild West. And many organizations, for example, the Mozilla Foundation, have been creating reports on where they see that regulation is needed. I have been part of that research, for example, as to, how YouTube continues to serve videos that are inappropriate to people and children, continues to allow videos that actually promote self-harm and discrimination. And those videos are out there, part of the 700 million hours of content that are viewed.
So can I ask you this? Can I ask you this? Talking about self-harm, whether it be to your body or whether it be to your mental health, is something there's been a lot of discussion about recently. And after the Euro 2020 final the other night, there was an awful lot of social media vilification of some players who didn't bring it through, or bring it home, if you like, for England. And this is what the Football Association had to say. Social media companies need to step up and take accountability and action to ban abusers from their platforms, gather evidence that can lead to prosecution, and support making their platforms free from this type of abhorrent abuse. Apart from the subjective difficulties here, is there any room for prosecution in this new bill?
There is, which is why it's in draft. What the bill covers right now is these are the areas that we need regulation for. These are the terms that need clarification and new definitions under the light that now they are part of a world called digital. And then the next step will be make it executive, meaning there'll be judicial repercussions.
Antony, you were nodding your head there. And Julia, I'm not ignoring you. I'm going to come to ask a bigger question about internet prosecutions across the world. But you were nodding your head there when you said there will be means of taking legal action against these companies other than just a financial punishment.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of what you were referring to, in terms of kind of racist content that emerged in the wake of the football, actually, racism and racist content is illegal in itself. So actually, the perpetrators of that content themselves can be prosecuted.
But will they be?
And that's actually what we'd.
Will they be? Does history tell us that these sort of things happen?
Our argument would be that they should be, particularly if we want to disincentivize behaviour. So, in actual fact, what I think we'll find over the course of coming days is that I think social media companies have been active in terms of monitoring and trying to take down content as quickly as possible. I think Twitter, for example, have said they've taken over 1,000 different tweets and suspended a number of accounts. So this is an area where social media companies are active. It's an area where working together with the FA, with footballing authorities, by focusing in on other activities as well that they can do to kind of counter racism in football. Actually, what we've seen is the industry being quite active. I think we'll hear more about that in the coming days.
Okay, and so Julia, does this add power to the legal authorities, this bill, or does it just go along with what we just heard from Antony, that it already exists and there are prosecutions?
I guess criminal prosecution cannot possibly capture all the illegal activities which go on social media platforms. Every abuse, every hate speech, every fraud, ranging from online dating websites right through to, all sorts of criminality. So I think it's a recognition that something more is needed. So we cannot just simply rely on the criminal law to deal with all the harms which happen in the online space, but that actually the platforms themselves should have a duty to address some of these issues in a balanced way, obviously balancing freedom of speech and privacy as well. But it puts a very heavy burden, of course, then on these platforms.
Well, yes. I mean, other than getting these extra powers that you talk about, is there anything that these companies themselves could do now?
Yes, essentially what they're already doing now is basically employing human moderators to look at some of the content which has been flagged by other users or by the police, and then take that content down and prevent it from being uploaded. One interesting question here is to what extent technology itself could help with this process. And here the use of, I think, artificial intelligence to recognize certain types of content will be critical, because some of this will have to be automated.
I was going to come to that in just a moment. Inma, this is one of your areas of expertise. Tell me whether that's where you were going when you were nodding in agreement, or whether you wanted to go somewhere else. And we'll turn it on to AI in just a second.
One of the things that has been blatantly exposed is that there are companies that actually profit from all of this disarray happening online, and that therefore they haven't been willing to cooperate. For example, the Mozilla Foundation has found that more than half of the videos that are recommended to people should never be on the platform, and yet they are being recommended. Many of them, I think about 13%, go against their community guidelines.
Is that because of human moderators or because of dodgy algorithms?
Because of dodgy algorithms, because the algorithms are very, very old, and they have programmed to do certain things that eventually they have completely discombobulated everything. And the problem with algorithms is that they are black boxes, and they're not code that you can go into a specific line and fix it. Therefore, you either Control-Alt-Delete everything and start from anew, or you put humans, which is what Facebook and everybody else are actually bringing the humans in to actually fix the problems. But fundamentally, It's about bringing ethics and alignment to laws in the analog world, what this bill is about.
But it's rather like asking
for
people
accountability.
It's rather like asking somebody to go through the entire collection of the British Library, the Library of Congress, and any other library that there are, trying to find the slightest spelling mistake in millions and millions of different books. It has to be done, surely. Surely, Antony, it has to be done by artificial intelligence in terms of the speed, and we're not there yet to get this right.
Well, we are.
Okay, you carry on then, Antony.
If Google has a computer vision for the level 5 automated cars, why not train the algorithm to recognize ISIS videos and not roll them in? You know, you can do a lot of things with AI. It's simply that they're not funding these initiatives until the laws will oblige them.
Okay, and is it the responsibility, Antony, sorry, you may have something you want to add anyway, is it the responsibility of the tech companies or the government that's putting these laws into place, that the funding of this?
I disagree that companies aren't doing anything, because I think actually particularly in areas like terrorist content, ISIS videos, as mentioned, or content that's related to child sex abuse and so on, I think companies have been quite successful in developing AI that can help identify and help them to address some of that content. And actually, if you look at the transparency reports that companies have published, you'll get a lot of detail there about just how much content they have taken down that they've been able to identify through their own technologies. But it's not perfect yet. We're not there yet, and that's why human content moderation remains very important. But coming back to the online safety bill, the reason why human content moderation remains incredibly important is because there are some really, really difficult subjective decisions that have to be made. And they become even more difficult when they're subjective decisions around language and the meaning of language. And that's why, from an industry perspective, what we want is to see more clarity and certainty in the legal framework that actually enables and makes it easier for companies to implement more rapid decision-making, which means that more inappropriate content...
Let me therefore ask Julia, since she understands the law better than I do and probably better than you two do, has it gone far enough?
Well, consider the shift of technology. You know, in the past, you would have had a judge who decides in a long drawn-out court case whether something is defamatory after hearing loads and loads of evidence. And now suddenly we've got millions, if not billions, of items of content, and you simply cannot apply that sort of test. At the same time, it is crucial, I think, for humanity to ensure freedom of speech, not just for democracy.
I was going to get onto that in just a second, if I may.
Okay.
Can I just put this up from the British government? Our world-leading laws will place clear and robust duties on companies and Ofcom to uphold and protect people's free speech while making sure they do not over-remove content. The bill's been designed with suitable and transparent checks and balances. Now, there are various groups, one of which I'm going to quote here, Legal to Say, Legal to Type. It talks about the fact that this is infringing upon people's freedom of speech, because things are going to be taken down. Inma, if you want to come in on this one, things are going to be taken down out of an overabundance of caution, perhaps.
Indeed, and it's because, and this is where the government is coming very strongly to prevent the freedom of speech is censored, because there's been cases in which social media have closed accounts because simply they didn't agree with the person expressing those opinions. The real problem is, what will they do if they silence journalists? Journalists should never be silenced. And therefore, the bill is going to create a framework for that censorship not to exist.
And you really think that that is one of the biggest dangers of this? It's a backdoor to censorship?
It is dangerous. Freedom of speech means you are free to express your opinion, but that doesn't mean you are free to harangue others. That is the difference. And this is where the social media platforms have a duty to prevent other people trolling others, haranguing others, and yet allowing everybody to have an opinion. That's the fragility of social media right now.
I know it's very difficult to define what might or might not be brought before a court, but when I used to work on newspapers, the editor of that newspaper and the publisher were ultimately responsible for every single word that appeared in that publication. Why should it not be the duty of tech companies, Antony, to actually go through every single thing that is out there, even if it costs them billions and billions of pounds because they're making billions in profits?
Well, because I think the important distinction is that that editor was responsible for the words that the publication said, but not necessarily for what it reported in terms of things that other people said. And the distinction here
that's not true, because if somebody reported something that was factually incorrect, libelous, defamatory, whatever you want to call it, then they were responsible still.
Yeah, but here we're talking about a situation where we're talking about third-party speech on a platform.
But that's a cop-out, isn't it? I mean, you know, you've not you personally, but I mean, these people have platforms upon which people put statements that may or may not be harmful, that make the platforms billions and billions of pounds. Should they not be duty-bound, whether it's through the law or elsewhere, to look at every single word, every single dot and comma, picture, every frame that's out there, and make sure that it doesn't hurt people?
Well, I think we have to determine the extent to which we think all of our language online should be monitored. That's the first thing. So I think
it's already out there, so people are reading it. It says being monitored by the consumers.
But I think, well, I mean, under EU legislation, there is a prevention of what's called general monitoring, a very long established principle in EU law. But I mean, I think what we're saying is we want a situation where it's not left to the private sector to make these really difficult subjective decisions. But as a society, we've decided what the norms should be, and how these delicate issues should be balanced, and therefore businesses have real clear guidance about what they should and shouldn't permit online. That's what we're trying to get to.
Okay, so you think there should be a level of scrutiny. This is perhaps a step in the right direction, but there needs to be more thought put into it. I hope I'm not putting words into your mouth. Julia, is that the way you think this is being set out, that it is actually something that needs to be done? And if you're the first country, well, I know Denmark and Germany have been doing something similar, but if you're one of the first countries to actually bring in this law, you're actually being rather brave.
I think the UK approach is very different and much more encompassing than what's happening in Denmark and Germany. I think they're slightly over-promising. I don't think there is such a thing as safety on the internet. The bill recognizes the importance of media literacy, because a lot of the content will migrate, especially the worst content, will migrate to places which are not regulated by Ofcoms. Think of encryption, think of the darknet. So the internet will never, ever be as safe as broadcasting it, simply because it's not as controlled. It cannot be controlled in the same way as a TV channel. And therefore, I think the bill overpromises something which it cannot achieve.
Do you sometimes wish the internet had never been invented?
No, I think overall, actually, the benefits for education, self-empowerment are amazing. The internet, I think, is an amazing tool for all sorts of purposes. But there comes a price, yes.
So my suggestion is that while some of this may be flawed, it may well get changed. Inma, the UK is being relatively brave in stepping out on this road.
Indeed. And one of the things the government is looking at is that social media eventually becomes a big mob, and people have been harmed and trolled. And this is where the law needs to put accountability on the tech companies. It's very nice to have a social media platform, but if it becomes a harassment tool for the masses, then you have to take action. And artificial intelligence can do this. So I think the UK is being extremely discerning in approaching the topic, understanding that above all, civil liberties need to be respected, but at the same time, social media platforms cannot become digital weapons to attack other people.
This is where I want to end with you, Antony, if I may, and I'm really not picking on you, it's just you happen to represent tech companies. I'm sure nobody sets out to hurt anybody when they set up a tech company, but do you know of a lot of people who've been quite surprised with the end results of what has happened through the internet and their providing of it?
Look, I think the internet has brought remarkable change and has been hugely beneficial in many, many ways. But of course, there are lots of outcomes that are things that nobody would have ever wanted. Our challenge is to try and work out how to drive the positive change that we want. And I think this legislation can play a really important role, but we need to get into the detail. We need to really look at how it's going to deliver on some of the things that my colleagues on the call have been talking about, and really get into scrutinizing the detail, really kind of kicking the tires on this legislation to see whether or not it will actually work. Because the one thing none of us want is a situation where 2 years down the line, things haven't improved.
Okay.
And so we think this is really important.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much indeed. It is a very complicated subject, made that much simpler by the three of you coming on this round table. We do appreciate it. Thank you. And wherever you happen to be watching this edition of Roundtable, we thank you for your time and for your patience and for your support. Keep on watching. We've got plenty more programs on our YouTube channel. There's TRT World Roundtable on YouTube. Until next time, from me, David Foster, and the Roundtable team, goodbye.